everybody. Welcome to Witchcraft and Voodoo. Well, we're trying to have it be a bi-weekly show, but it's when we get it going on, hopefully every couple of weeks. And, if you want to see all of them, we've done quite a few of them right now. Some of them are on my channel and some of them are on my co-host channel, Sable Aradia. I'm a voodoo priestess trained in New Orleans style voodoo, and I also have initiations in a few other ATRs. And I'll let you, Sable, describe your own background because you can do a better job than I can.
Well, I'm a Wiccan priestess, and I'm a traditional witch, and I'm initiated in the Star Sapphire and Pagans for Peace traditions, which come from very different streams. So it's really kind of interesting. Pagans for Peace kind of comes out of the whole fairy reclaiming stream, right? And but they're both eclectic, right? They both adopt from each other, so it's kind of fun. And the Star Sapphire stream comes out of British traditional witchcraft, but it incorporates a lot of eclectic stuff, which I don't think I've ever actually said in my intro before. So maybe people will, have a better idea where I'm coming from.
That's good. And I think it's really appropriate for today because today we're going to be talking about, what to do when you're first starting out. I think we've covered some of these things a little bit here or there in some of the other shows, the one we just did about ritual tools and things like that. And but I think that there's a lot of people that are new to these traditions. Every time I turn around, there's more beginners trying to really find out how to truly connect. And I think that for me, there's no shortcuts. So I wanted to have a show about what the proper way was to begin, because if you try and take shortcuts or make it all up or other things like that, I think that some of us, that's the reason we have these kinds of things and learn from people, is because other people have made those mistakes, so you don't have to make those same mistakes yourself. So we're just going to talk a little bit today about beginning. All right, so for me, I think the first thing really, a lot of times people, it's funny, we were just talking about dreams, and people come to me and they say they've had a dream about the Orisha or the Loa, and what does this mean? And I think that it's hard for them to understand, especially coming from a witchcraft background, whereas, I could have a dream about Hecate or a dream about Inanna, and that really would seem like a calling, whereas in ATRs, it's not so much of a calling and more of just like a connection, like a door is opened and it's a beginning. It's not necessarily a license to go out. It's just more of sort of a prompting to get your head straight and figure out exactly what it is you want to do. If we take a deity like Oshun, she shows up in Lucumi tradition, she shows up in Candomblé, she shows up in Ifa. She's got a lot of different variations depending on what part of the world you're looking at and how the worship goes. So I think that for me, figuring out what tradition you want to start out in is a really good beginning. And I'm convinced nobody reads my book except for me. It's about to be republished, but that's why I wrote this book. So, because it does sort of give people an overview of all the different traditions. And I think that you really need to know exactly what's going to be better off for you when you're starting out. Are you going to be somewhere where, obviously availability has something to do with it, but we're really a global, you're talking about you're in Canada and you've, done things in British witchcraft and stuff like that. And I'm in New York and I've done things that have to do with Cuban Lucumi or stuff like, and I've had priestesses that study, Macumba without having gone to Brazil. So I think that there's a lot more opportunity these days. So that's good. But my first thing would be definitely to decide what tradition you want to start in, that I think, and finding out about that. How would you start? How would you recommend people start if they want to be a witch?
Most people start with internet or books. That's where they start, right? Statistically, there are more solitary pagans than any other kind, right? And they tend to be practicing a sort of, Wiccan-ish tradition, right? Although, okay, bit of a soapbox, right? I personally think that the initiated witch groups kind of shot their own foot off in the 90s, because they were all like, you can't call yourself a Wiccan if you're not initiated in a tradition. And I don't agree with them at all, right? Okay. And I never have. I know you've got like wide eyes now. I know this is a big controversy.
Yeah, it's controversial.
Okay, Wicca is a religion, right? Like Christianity is a religion, like Buddhism is a religion, right? And therefore, there are different denominations of that religion, right? It's not all one thing. So yours is the British traditional witchcraft, and say it's the British traditional witchcraft denomination, right? Which we call traditions, right? That's fine, right? But that doesn't make other people's denominations illegitimate. It just makes them different, right?
Yeah.
Now, of course, when the Catholic Church, when the whole Anglican thing started happening, and then the 95 Thesis and all of that sort of thing, right? They were all like, these aren't real Christians, right? And sorry, you lost. History as history has not answered that well. I think the same thing is going to be true of Wicca in the long run, right? Wicca is a religion. Paganism is a branch of different religions. Many of them fall under that heading, right? As you participate in the pagan community, you define the various traditions that you're involved in as pagan, but definitely they would not be Wiccan. So there's this, argument about what the terms mean. So that's where I stand on it. Right. Okay. So that being said, most people start with books or the internet, and they find it confusing because everybody claims to be, this is what we do in Wicca. And nobody says, this is what we do in British traditional Wicca. This is what we do in reclaiming Wicca. No, this is what we do in Dianic Wicca. Nobody says that stuff. So maybe the best thing to do, we probably don't have time, but I'll try to do a brief overview of where the big ones are coming from, the ones you're most likely to encounter, right? Okay, so if you read, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to say if you read Buckland or the Ferrers or whatever, what you're looking at is British traditional witchcraft, which is it's an initiatory tradition, or at least it started that way, although there is now this, what they call an outer court, right, which is the stuff that's published to the public, right? And that is, if you're looking for an initiatory witchcraft with this, god and goddess polarity stuff at its heart, that's that stuff, right? Although the Ferrers have now gone in Janet Ferrer, Gavin Bone,
yeah,
have now gone in a more, in progressive witchcraft direction, they call it, which tends to be less focused on the gender binary, which I approve of. I think that's a cool idea. So, okay, so there's that, and there's divisions in the divisions, right?
Right.
And then you have Dianic witchcraft, or goddess spirituality is a feminist-oriented witchcraft in which it's intended for women's empowerment, and it focuses on goddesses and how they may have appeared to different cultures, and it tends to be very eclectic, and decisions tend to be made collectively. There isn't really a kind of hierarchical progression, and that's cool too, right? There's some real deep political divisions going on in that group right now. Whether or not you support trans people is the big argument over that. Right? I'm definitely on the trans ally side. Sorry, just like get over it. Is my
opinion. Really. I'm with you 100%, in case anybody was worrying. Yes.
That's right. Exactly. Right. So I think it's self-evident. So for me. Okay. So there's that. Right. And then reclaiming is that sort of started with Starhawk and her book, The Spiral Dance. And there's a whole community of really powerful people, a lot of queer men and women, and, they've written a lot of great stuff in that. And it comes out of Dianic witchcraft, so it tends to be and fairy witchcraft, which is its own thing, right? But that it tends to be very, again, eclectic, and decisions are made collectively, and it draws from a lot of different things. Fairy witchcraft is its own branch of initiatory tradition, which started in the United States as opposed to in the UK, right? And it comes out of Victor and Cora Anderson, who were sort of, they had like Victor had like a divine vision, at least, that's the story. And other than that, I don't know that much about it, other than how it's influenced other traditions. But T. Thorne Coyle wrote a great book. What is it called? Looking here, Evolutionary Witchcraft, which is probably a good way to kind of get a start if you're looking to see if that might be for you. And then there's kind of an eclectic Wiccan sort of path that tends to come out of the books that were very popular in the 80s and 90s, like, you know, Scott Cunningham and, you know, all that sort of thing. And I think that they tend to be, you know, like the most commonly practiced form, right? So it's really a matter of what you're looking for, again, right? What does witchcraft mean to you? What is the core, like, look at their theology, right? And see if it agrees with you, right? For example, queer and trans people often don't do well in a tradition that emphasizes a gender binary, right? Now, granted, there's variations of that don't, right? Yvonne Abro has written an excellent book on the topic called All Acts of Love and Pleasure, which is amazing. And that's sort of more what my witchcraft looks like. So
where would you place Cabot witches? We've got a lot of Cabot witches over here on the East Coast.
Cabot witches! I almost forgot about them. I shouldn't have. Okay, no. Well, Lori Cabot, of course, is like, geez, I don't even know. She came out of a bunch of different influences, as I recall, right? She's was traditionally initiated in British traditional witchcraft, but she also came out of the Dianic tradition, right? And she kind of combined a lot of those elements and some other influences. And she's, yeah, the Cabot witches are their own thing too, right? They've got, well, you know, Lori Cabot herself has written a lot of great books, which, you know, I've read quite a few of them. They're excellent. I've got a reference of hers I use for herbalism, like, to this day, and I think it's an excellent place to start if you're looking for, again, that's very eclectic, right? Like well,
I feel like that too with Christopher Penczak, who was originally, you know, a Cabot,
right,
but now he's developed temple witchcraft and done his own thing, sort of taking off from that basis of knowledge. So yeah, that's another chunk. It's so many. I mean, and it's funny thinking about it because we have in ATRs, we have so many too. There's so many individual ways, and it's not, I mean, the theology behind it is that each one is correct. So it's not like, oh, they're using this herb for that, that's wrong. It's like, okay, well, this is what you do, and that's fine. But there is a huge amount of variation. And I think there's also, you know, the trans question is very important for a lot of people. I just did a workshop in New Orleans over Mardi Gras, and half my audience was trans people, and they were like, well, where do I go? You know, where do I go? Because some of these things, Lucumi, also known as Santeria, has been traditionally not the friendliest to LGBTQIA people. So I think that, but what I usually explain to them is that there are certain divinations that you can get that says that it's more allowed for you to, I think there's 2 of them out of all the Patakis that deal with people that are LGBTQ. So if, you know, you get one of those, it's like, even though there's an inherent bias in the religion against this, these 2 divination signs sort of give you a pass. So I think that's the way of just the gods and everybody sort of working together, where you're still allowed to, in a certain context, some people are still allowed to express that within the confines of the religion. But yeah, do your homework about that. New Orleans voodoo is much more, I think, inclusive just because of the city, because it has so many different groups of people coming in, the French and the Spanish and Africans and indigenous people, that they're very open to different kinds of groups and different kinds of people worshiping, and very well, whether or not you want to call it inclusion or cultural appropriation or whatever, I don't really care, but they do have different elements that come from different traditions. And originally those things were brought by the people from those traditions. So that's why I wouldn't necessarily call it cultural appropriation, but it is things where you might see somebody doing something very different from what you think they would be doing based on their ethnicity. So just, I guess, do your research. I'm not really big on the internet because I think that there's so much stuff in the internet that's crappy. I had a friend of mine who was teaching her workshop out of information from Wikipedia. And I know I did a blog post on it. You know, getting something into Wikipedia is kind of hard. You know, people can use me as a source, but I can't go into Wikipedia and use myself as a source. That's illegal. So it ends up being very kind of confusing in there, and what information ends up in there. And anybody who's looked at it knows, especially about, you know, goddess spirituality or ATRs, there's a lot of stuff on there that's wrong, you know, and we just sort of got to work to change it. You know, that said, if anybody wants to make a Wikipedia page for me, I'd be happy to look at it. I can't do it for myself, but
yeah, I think we all feel the same way. You know, actually, that's an interesting point. This is off topic, but it's relevant to what you just said, right? At one time, there was like an on-staff Wikipedia editor who was making a point of eliminating all of the neo-pagan stuff, right? Like that was his goal. He was like a hardcore Christian of some kind, and he was like, this is all wrong. And so he would question every article. Is this relevant? Mm-hmm. Where are your sources, etc., right? So basically, all that stuff was eliminated. And then since he's been gone, because he's been gone for a while now, yeah, right? It seems that a lot of Reconstructionist types have been writing their version of events, mm-hmm, on, you know, and therefore there's a lot of, I felt that the Wicca entry was very biased. I felt, mm-hmm, that the Greek paganism entry was incredibly self-crowing, right? I finally got my crap together and got a Wikipedia editing account, and I'm going to be doing my best to fix some of this stuff. And I would really like to see more pagans, right, especially the ones who are scholars and well-researched and can cite sources, get involved, start editing Wikipedia. They are giving people the wrong information about us, right? There is like nothing on Canadian paganism. The only thing you can find, right, is a brief article about the Wiccan Church of Canada and a brief article about Sam Wagner. That's it, right? And we have this huge community that's so, you know, interactive. There isn't even an article called Canadian Paganism. Right?
Wow.
Let's get with it, guys. Come on.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's not that hard. I mean, it's going to take you some sitting down and, you know, like you said, you've got to wait to get the editorial permissions, you know. But I'll try and remember to put it in the links. I did write a whole post about how to do that and how to go about that and stuff like that. And I think that, yeah, for those of us who are scholars, it's really important that we do this. It's really important that we sort of control the information that's out there about us, because so much of it is really, you know, fake and false. And just because somebody, you know, you have to be able to cite your sources, but just because somebody found this was written in a newspaper or something, we all know that doesn't mean it's 100% true, but at least it's slightly better than what a lot of people are doing these days, which is just making everything all up. So that I find also, you know, yeah, problematic to say the least. But yeah, just check out your sources. You know what I mean? And I really honestly don't want to see another presenter teaching, you know, with handouts from Wikipedia. That was very disheartening to me, that's the story about what, you know, she was doing. I mean, nice lady, but, you know, that's not necessarily where you're going to get the best information. So I think people should try and, you know, really, what are your sources and what's happening and where are you getting things from and stuff like that. So
if you're looking for basics, stuff that, you know, you can skim through and go, okay, what is this basically about and what can I give to other people to tell them what this is about, right? The Pagan Pride Project has had excellent resources in that nature for quite a lot of years now.
Yeah.
And
yeah, you know, I remember writing entries for them back to the in Ontario, right? Yeah, right. I remember writing stuff for them 25 years ago. They wanted me to write their entries on ATRs and things like that. So they've been, you know, yeah, really cataloging information in a really good way. And I just, when I was looking on my phone, I wanted to say in the post that I did, we have an organization here. They're international, but they're here in New York City, called Afro Crowd, and they're really dedicated to putting out more people of color entries on Wikipedia. They sit you down, they bring in one of the editors there's a Wikipedia, and they do them all over the world. I know they had a national gathering in Toronto, I believe, last year, and then they're always in Africa and South America, and they do a lot of really good work. So I think that, you know, if we're talking about finding information, we also have to talk about producing these kinds of information in a responsible way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And another good place that I find to start if you're interested in neo-paganism anyway, there's nothing there that I know of in, you know, the Afro-Caribbean diasporic traditions. I don't know anything there, but sacred-text.com, right? It's because you can get, you know, Gardner's Book of Shadows. Of course, a bunch of the traditional initiated types will tell you that's not actually the Gardner's Book of Shadows. No, it's not that a Gardner's Book of Shadows that you got. Because yours has been handed down, and like anything, it's been added to and changed, and people went, I don't think this is important, and whatever. And that's cool, because that's a living tradition, and that's great. But that doesn't mean that there's, like, you know, a definitive Book of Shadows, right? So this, anyway, it's one version, right? And it's, you know, sacredtext.com does its research, the scholarly type, so I'm pretty sure it's pretty close to the original, right? So it's there. There's a bunch of stuff. Aradia, Gospel of the Witches is there, right? But you got to take this stuff with a grain of salt, right? Read the stuff like you read the Bible, right? Nobody's supposed to take it literally.
No, that's a very good point. I think that people do go to the extremes, and that's part of the problem, because people do sort of look at these things and then sort of have this reaction about it, and it's not the same kinds of things, you know, that we're talking about, really.
Yes,
But it does seem really murky. I mean, I can see how people think the ATRs are really murky, and we've talked about this before. You know, Wicca does seem very murky as well. You know, you're talking about the Ferrars, and, you know, I know that there was some, you know, divide between the Frosts and their connection to, you know, Wicca to begin with, and then also, you know, apparently, I mean, this is no spoilers for anybody, but Maxine Sanders and Oberon Zell got into it a couple of years ago at an event that I do about, you know, the origins of the tradition. So I think even the highest of the high ups in the traditions have disagreements about how it began and what it consists of and what people can call themselves. And everything really is very fluid and changing. You know, I mean, yes, treat it like the Bible, but there is no one centralized thing where we can say, oh, well, Janet said this, or, you know, the Frost said this, and that's what everybody believes. And it's the same kind of thing for us. There is no one. We just finally got the first state-sanctioned priest in Haiti of Vodou, and he's allowed to do marriages and stuff like that. But this is, you know, it was recognized as a religion over a decade ago, and this is the first time they've actually certified a priest down there in Haiti. So everything is really slow going, especially when we're talking about mainstream people accepting these things. There was something, I think this is sort of an attached part to it. How do you feel about, okay, I know you said you don't necessarily think someone has to go through these initiations in order to call themselves, you know, Wicca, but how do you feel about people, okay, what if I just want to wake up and say I'm a natural born witch? Like, how do you feel about that?
I think a lot of people think they know more about the thing than they actually do. That's what I think. I do believe in natural abilities, right? You can call them psychic powers or, you know, natural magic or whatever you want. And I think that stuff exists, right? I experienced it myself, right? I had, the reason why I've ended up here is because I had prophetic dreams from the time I was 10. Right. So this is how I ended up on this path. Right. But okay, if I were 10 years old, right. Remember, this is the first time I had this dream. Right. And I came forward and I said, okay, I've got this new tradition and I'm going to, you know, no. Right. Because first of all, even if you are naturally a witch, to be good at magic, right? And I think, okay, yeah, I guess this is a good opportunity to talk about Wicca and witchcraft are two different things, right? Wicca is a religion, right? So with a lot of different denominations, right? Witchcraft is a practice, right? And a job description, really. A witch is a job description,
Yeah.
right? So, but lots of different traditions and religions call themselves witches if they practice magic. So you can't assume, you know, that the two are the same, right? Obviously. Okay, So yeah, if the problem when somebody comes out of the woodwork and says, oh, I've had this divine revelation and now I'm going to teach. Now, okay, it can work. It has worked in history. Let's be honest here. In the days when, you know, Gardner was out there doing his thing and the Sanders were out there doing their thing and whatever, right? Basically, everybody was just saying, I've got this thing and this is what I'm doing, right? And none of them, right? None of them are legit, right? None of them, right? Even, you know, the British traditional witchcraft, right? What Gardner was probably taught was probably a lot more like the traditions of the cunning folk, right? And that sort of thing, and was not at all what modern Wicca looks like. So it's all brand new. None of you have the right to say yours is the ancient tradition that goes back to whatever. It's inspired by, right? But it isn't, right? So you know, and that's unfortunately, you know, a bunch of people then start coming along who say, okay, Wicca's been discredited, so now my thing is this, you know, ancient tradition. They're all full of dung in the same way that all the martial arts traditions are full of dung when they claim they're the ancient initiated tradition, and all the secret societies like the Masons and the Rosicrucians, we're the ancient tradition that goes back to, no, you're not, right? None of them are, right? So, okay. So yes, it can work. That's the exception, right? Most of the time, what ends up happening is that somebody gets this idea that they're the chosen one, right? Because they've had these dreams or these visions or whatever, right? And because they think they're the chosen one, they don't take criticism well. They don't believe they can make mistakes. And they often do, right? Because they just can't see it because they think they're the chosen one. Well, millions of people are called in this way. Millions of people have these dreams, right? Millions of people have these visions. Millions of people can tell you what the next card is you're going to pick up from the card deck. You're not that special, right? You might have a talent, right? In the same way that some people are really brilliant artists and other people struggle, right? Yeah. But that doesn't mean you're, you know, chosen by the gods to deliver the message from the mound, right? So I urge you to be cautious of anybody who says so. You're really better off talking to someone who's willing to occasionally say, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I feel exactly the same way about it. You know, like I said, there's a lot of people that feel that, and we really don't have any self-initiation. So I think for ATRs, it takes it even a step further, that you can have this connection to them, but there must also be some kind of training and guidance, you know, because it's not even just for yourself. I could even allow that you're saying you're this great magical prodigy who knows all these things about stuff. That's okay for you, but if you're going to turn around and teach that to other people, you know, it's like cooking. You make something once, okay, maybe it tastes okay. If you've made that thing 1,000 times for 1,000 different people, and you're, you know, under the training of somebody who's made it for hundreds of thousands of times for different people, you're going to have a very different product at the end, and that product is going to be way better than you with your natural knowledge just coming to it and doing it once. And that's the way I feel about it, you know, that there's things I was thinking about, you know, writing my first book. I had been working as a witch and a practitioner for 15 years at that point. And it's nothing compared to what I know now, 15 years after, 15 years later. It's like night and day almost. I'm not saying I wasn't competent, but the things that I've learned in the past 10 years, doing it in every situation, under every circumstance, and learning from other people who've done it in all these different circumstances, it really does give me kind of an insight as to what is going on. And that's how it works, because you need to learn from people. You need to learn from, and I guess this brings up my other point about if you're just starting is, you know, yes, find books, but find people you trust too, like as authors to read, as mentors, as people to be in the group with, you know, and just find out about them, because there are a lot of people out there that have dubious motives or are manipulators or using this on some sort of weird power grab. So do what you can to check out these groups ahead of time. Talk to the other people in the group, see what they're like. Are they all a bunch of fruitcakes? Well, maybe don't join that group, or maybe they're your right kind of fruitcake, so you'll fit right in. But
we're all a little weird. It's
yeah.
true.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a family. It really does. Our spiritual houses operate as families. So it's like you're going to be electing to join this family. And these are the people you're going to go to when you're sick, or when you lose your job, or when you're having, relationship issues. These are the people that are going to help you and support you and help you do your magic. So you have to choose wisely. You really have to choose somebody you trust. And hopefully your leader is also somebody you trust. And the only way you can find that out is both by doing your legwork research and also looking with your eyes and your other senses and stuff. And what does it feel like when you're around them? What does it feel like to be in circle? I mean, all of my godmothers, I absolutely love them, and they make me feel divine when I'm around them. So that was just a natural fit for me, and I've been with all of them, since I started, which is also really rare. So I think I was lucky enough to find that. But I also did not just jump into it and say, oh, okay, I'm going to go to my local corner thing and join their group and sign on for whatever. Speaking of Wicca, I had a student that did that with one of the covens in Salem. And he came to me and he said, well, how do I get out of it? And I'm like, well, they've measured you up with a cord and they've locked that away in their safe. And I don't, it's not easy to get out of it if it's at all possible, So once you've made those promises, then it's very hard to turn back. So I think to wait and be cautious, even though we all want to run out and be the leader or the high priestess. My godmother used to say she doesn't initiate anybody until they absolutely don't want it anymore. And I think that that's really smart, because if you've been doing it for a while, you realize it is a responsibility. It is that you're going to be, people are going to call you in the middle of the night, or people are going to hassle you about this, and you have to be able to be present, because it does function like clergy. You're going to have to be able to be there with them as a, family kind of way to support them when they need it. So I think that that's something to be mindful of when you're starting as well.
I think anybody can go ahead and call themselves a Wiccan. I think we've got it reversed, right? Okay, right? Like I said, the traditional initiatory types kind of shot their own foot off in the 90s when Yahoo groups was the thing, right? Okay, I think anybody can be a Wiccan in the same way that anybody can be a Christian, or anybody can be a Buddhist, or whatever, right? And there are many different denominations, so know what denomination you're, gravitating to, and speak from that perspective, right? But I don't think anybody can be a witch, right? If you're wanting to teach other people, that's where you need to go and learn yourself, right? Although I will say that I do believe eventually everybody reaches a point in their own practice where they can't do anymore unless they do it with a group, or do it, or teach, right? And when you have reached that point, but I'd also say, don't proclaim to be anything that you're not, right? Okay, I started teaching basic stuff about paganism long before I had connected to an initiatory tradition or a formal teacher, right? But I never claimed to be anything that I wasn't. I said, okay, I've been reading about this stuff for a while, and I've been practicing this stuff for a while, and this is where I'm coming from my own experience. No, I don't have any initiations. No, I don't, I never claimed that, the goddess had given me a directive, right? None of that stuff, right? I just said, this is what, I have learned from where I'm at, right? And the stuff I was teaching was very basic. This is kind of loosely what it's about, right? And I have totally, years later now, right? I'm 44. I've been doing this for more than 30 years, right? At this point, okay, no, I'll say officially 30 years is at this point, because I, made it official when I was about 14. So 30 years, right? And I would teach that class in a completely different way now, right, than I would have then, right? And not to say that what I was teaching was wrong, but I think I have a better understanding of it now. I know more about what it means. I know more about individual groups that I'd only heard of at the time. I've now interacted with representatives of a lot of different groups that, I mean, that's the other thing about stuff like this, is it tends to be very regional, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of this is a direct taught kind of way in which we do things. And most of us, you know, will eventually reach a point where in our reading, we want to go learn from somebody. And who is available does vary like vastly between regions, right? You go to a pagan festival in BC and it doesn't look anything like the pagan festivals in Alberta, right? And that's just the next province over, right? And I thought it was very interesting when I did the Canadian National Pagan Conference in Montreal, right? Because that was totally different. Again, we didn't have New Orleans voodoo people involved in our pagan community. And that was my first acquaintance with that, right? You know, right? There's a lot of stuff that comes from the French magical tradition, which is very different from the English magical tradition. And often the two don't cross because the language barrier, right? But in Montreal, which might be the most bilingual city in the world, they do. And it's amazing, right? I want to learn more about that I started reading about that French stream and starting to talk to people more because there's so much there. And there's always something to learn. That's the other thing. No matter how long you've done this, right? I have barely scratched the surface of all the stuff that I can still learn. I'm so excited about all the stuff that I have yet to learn. So.
Yeah, I don't really understand that, you know. I said something the other day about, you know, yes, I considered myself somebody who was born with, you know, witchcraft abilities and psychic power and stuff like that. But then what I've layered onto it is, you know, initiatory practice and then decades of scholarship on top of that, you know. And I'm not saying that to make somebody feel bad if they don't have these things that I've done. I'm just saying I can see the value in it. And I think that just as a rule that people should say that, oh, okay, that this is something that could be valuable. You know, even if we we're talking about doing another show about herbs, even if we talk about something as simple as, you know, a single herb, it could have hundreds, if not thousands of different uses, you know, depending on what culture, depending on where it grows, you know, like I tell my godkids, what is it growing next to? There's so many, the planetary influences, there's so many ways to explore just a single plant. And then if you think about a religion, then it's a huge thing. I always tell people, the guy who used to write my reviews for the newsletter, his name's John Gray, he wrote a 600-page book called Ashe, which is an annotated bibliography, 8-point type of every book that he could find about African traditional religions. And he said he could never stop learning. And that's the guy who wrote the 600-page book about it and every entry just has like 2 or 3 sentences, and he's read each of these books, and he's like, no, I could go and do this for the rest of my life. So as you might have had a dream or something, and I think that's great. I'm not trying to discount someone's dream and connection to the Orisha or to the religion, but there's so much more. There's so much more out there. There's songs, there's chants, there's dances, there's recipes, there's stories, there's costumes, there's ways to wear your hair, there's everything you can think of related to these Orisha. There's different paths of the Orisha, there's different names, there's different chants, it depends on what language you're using. You know, it's so complex. So, you know, I'm not saying that people shouldn't be happy about that connection, but they should welcome an even greater connection if they have the opportunity. And that's what studying with the house gives you, is this opportunity to go forward and move more and into the actual tradition. And I think that's one way it does differ from, there's a whole lot of hubbub this week, I'm going to write about it, about whether or not Isaac Bonowitz appropriated voodoo for ADF, which I kind of feel like this is the week of water is wet kind of questions, you know. I mean, he says so in the beginning of my book that that was his basis in magic, was studying with somebody who was a voodoo priestess. So if you're coming up with a new tradition and this is the tradition that you're familiar with, it makes sense that some of those elements are going to be incorporated into the new tradition that you're developing. But without sounding like one of those old farty ladies, you know, I mean, things were different when he did that back in 1983, and it's a very different climate now that we have. And even within his lifetime, he revised a lot of those things to incorporate new things in it and stuff like that. But when we're talking about the ATRs, it has been sort of a continuous line, whereas while, you know, Wicca may have been some sort of, like you said about Gardner learning, something that was probably more folk-based and those kinds of things. There were practitioners, but it's not the same kind of formalized system that we're talking about coming out of Africa for the past 1,000 years. Now, some people do discount that that's the timeline, but we do have evidence of people, say, worshiping Shango in 400 BCE. So there is evidence of some of these Orisha, you know, being worshipped for, what is that now? Oh, wow, 2,400 years. So
I'm not going to say that pagan worship hasn't existed underground in some form, right? Again, right? But, you know, Yoruba doesn't exactly look like New Orleans voodoo, right?
no.
They're two entirely different animals.
Yes.
And the same holds true of Wicca. Wicca looks nothing like whatever was going on in the ancient traditions. And I absolutely, okay, yes, I know there were things going on in, you know, the Renaissance, at least we know that for a fact, and probably the Middle Ages, we're pretty sure too, that were folk traditions that were being passed down, and that's fine. I'm saying that that's not Wicca. Like, Wicca is relatively new, right? So, right, understanding that it's relatively new, there's lots of different places to go, and you got to understand, like you say, right, cultural appropriation, yeah, it's a thing, and we need to be aware of that. And the fact is, the whole history of the Western cult tradition, right back, right, is stained with cultural appropriation.
Sure.
Right, that is where it started. Right, and it will, like, the early like some of the early ritual magic traditions were borrowing stuff from the Pythagorean tradition, which was being continued in Islamic lands. So they were stealing all that stuff, and that's been going on for forever. We can't deny that, but it's been going on now long enough that there is a certain tradition of its own that has developed. So it's just a matter of, let's try not to make it worse by, you know, stealing stuff from other people even now, or claiming that we have, you know, things that we don't, right? But I mean, yeah, right, there were a lot of cross-fertilization periods going on. In 1983, everybody was talking to each other and everybody was exchanging information. New traditions were being born, right? It was all about that, right? And then that happened. It seems to work in like 20-year cycles, I think, doesn't it? Right? Because
Yes.
the 60s were like that too,
Right.
And the 40s were like that, and you know, right? And the 20s were like that.
Yeah.
Right? We're going right back, but that's, you know, that's the 20s is when you know, like Crowley was still doing his stuff, and you know, and everybody was talking to each other. It was a very small community, and everybody knew everybody else, and everybody interacted. So of course, there was a lot of crossover. There had to be. They were all hungry for this information, and at that time, they were the ones who were digging it out of, you know, other cultures or ancient histories or the vaults of the Western mystery tradition or whatever, right? And they were, you know, like, it was limited where they could get this information. So of course they were all exchanging information, and things were going to cross pollinate, which, you know, so like, I don't know, right? Like, I agree that cultural appropriation is a problem. We need to be aware of it. We shouldn't be adding to it, but we should also be aware that, yeah, things were different once upon a time. And if you've been practicing something a certain way for 20 years, that's its own thing now, you know? Right? That's my opinion anyway.
Yeah, no, that is how I feel about it. I mean, I also feel like, you know, we're going to go after a dead man for cultural appropriation. Okay. We've got kids that are being detained from their parents. We've got people being killed because they're trans or black or whatever. You know, we have things that are much more important in my mind to be concentrating on right now. I'm not saying people shouldn't get all upset about this, that, or the other thing, but that said, it's not, and to me, part of the cultural appropriation thing is always, oh, did you just take it and not tell people where it came from? You know, part of my reason is people are just saying that, oh my gosh, Isaac did that. And I'm like, well, but he goes into it. He always said this is what he did, you know, so it's not, shouldn't come as a surprise. He said this is where he got a lot of these things, you know, and So whatever, again, should somebody start tomorrow and say, oh, okay, well, I like this headdress, I'm going to wear that, and I'm going to stick a big pentacle on it, and then I'm going to hang some ritual beads off it, and
Yeah, let's please not do
play
that.
myself a shaman, and
Oh,
everyone
yeah.
should pay me, and I'll write a book, and so that's where I think the issues come up.
Yeah.
There's a whole new way of doing things, and I think we do have the luxury of being mindful now. We can find out about what's happening, and where these things come from, and who to give proper tribute to, and to remember those things. So that should be done, I guess. If you're studying, figure out where the people that you're learning from, where did they get their information from? What's their credentials? It's funny, a lot of my students are also very scholarly like me, and I like that. I think that that's one of those things that we just sort of jive well together, that we're people that study and want more knowledge and want to read more things and find out more things and try new things. And that's just how we do stuff, as opposed to, I don't have a lot of intuitive light workers as students, because those people work very differently than my students do. So I think the people need to find where they fit, and what's going to be a good fit for them, really.
There are all kinds of places for intuitive light workers. If that's the way you want to do it, there are lots of traditions that will welcome you with open arms, and absolutely, right? Like there really is something for everybody, I think. They're describing themselves as humanist pagans, right? They don't believe in the supernatural. They don't believe in literal gods, right? They don't believe in spirits. They believe in, these are metaphors for natural principles that we interact with. That's perfectly legit. There is nothing in Wiccan theology that says that you have to actually believe in literal gods or spirits or magic. It's not there. So, cool. Go for it. There's so many different ways to do it, right? So I guess what to give a clear advice directive out of that, if you're taking our advice, I would say, do your research, right? Check your sources, determine what denomination this person is coming from, because if you get contradictory information, odds are good that it's just a different denomination. Right? And, see if you can find someone to practice with in your area, right? And see if they're a good fit for you. And, most people, right, will be doing something that's intended for, the general public. If they're practicing, there will be a pagan pride festival in your area. There will be, public Sabbath ceremonies or something, right? Like they'll do them occasionally, because so go hang out with that group and tell them, look, I'm not looking to join right now. I'm just kind of checking it out, seeing if I fit, right? And they should be welcoming. If they're not, you probably don't want to practice with them, right? They might say, oh, well, like you might meet an initiated witch at a pagan pride gathering who might say, yeah, you kind of got to learn some stuff before we can bring you to our coven. But they should be willing to tell you what it is you need to learn and teach you, right? Or maybe there's a personality conflict and you're just not going to get along. That happens lots. Doesn't mean they're bad witches or that you are. It just means that you don't get along. There's shitheads in every place at work, or why not, right? Some people know their stuff and are still jerks, right? So
no, it's very true. It's very true. I'm sneezing. Sorry. Cool. Allergy season.
Me too.
We've gone from freezing season to allergy season. Next will be is that fireworks or gunshot season? Those are
for us. It'll be like, oh, this haze in the air, is that dust or smoke? Yeah.
Okay. See, there you go. So, but no, I'm glad you said that. I know we're at like over our half-hour mark. But I'm glad you said that about Pagan Pride, because I really wanted to say that. I'm really active in our New York City Pagan Pride group here, and I want to just commend them and all the staff there for everything that they do, because they're really very, very well represented. You know what I mean? There's OTO groups that go. There's all different kinds of Wiccan groups that go. There's Cabot witches that go. There's just about everybody and every kind kind of, people say to me, oh, I can't find anything to do in New York City. And I'm just like, well, but there's all these people that have open Sabbats, and we have the pagan pride, and we have all these things. And, we really do try our best to get out there and let people see who we are, and,
where do you find them? People will want to know. Paganpride.org is a good place to start. They will generally list the events and what cities are hosting them, right? And they will have contact people who will be your local coordinator, and you talk to that person and they can probably tell you where to get started with just about anything, right? Another good source is still to this day, witchvox.com. Although you do have to check the links because people don't update them regularly, but you will find something if you're persistent there.
Oh yeah, I mean they've done that for a really long time, and I commend Fritz and Ren for keeping that still going. It can't be easy, so
Oh, I'm sure.
it's a huge undertaking. Yeah. So that's definitely, you're right. That is a really wonderful resource. I mean, unfortunately for ATRs, we have much less of kinds of things, but I think that more and more people are really coming out of the, broom closet, so to speak, as far as the ATRs are concerned, or coming out of the cauldron closet, like Azalea Banks. So there are a lot more things. Go to your local Botanica, though. They might not necessarily be, I don't know if it's a personality clash or it's just a cultural thing. They're not necessarily going to invite you to their next bembe if you walk through the door. They're not necessarily, but they will certainly sell you a candle and talk to you about things if you have an issue or a problem. And as you get to know them more and more, maybe they will invite you if there's an open ceremony. Pay attention. Here in New York, a lot of the voodoo people are connected to the Haitian cultural organizations, so people can join their cultural organizations and sort of go through those kinds of avenues or channels. And there are a few, in New Orleans, there's a bunch of open temples. There's, my priestess Miriam from the Voodoo Spiritual Temple. She's been really open for a long time. And there's other people down there. Sally Ann Glassman, I just saw her for Mardi Gras. It was so weird. I ran into her unwittingly. But she's got the place at the Healing Center, which is sort of an open temple and a store where people can go in and talk to her. And she does a lot of different things down there. So, really just talk to people and find out, what's going on and what kind of things people do. And you're going to have to, I know so many witches just want to stay in their little bubble. So you're going to have to open your little bubble a little bit, I think. And it's uncomfortable for all of us, but I think that's part of what really has to happen if you're really looking to connect with people. That's all I have to say. Do you have anything else to wrap up, Sable?
No, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. I'm sure that there are probably things that people still want to know, but once again, I will encourage people to tell us about that in the comments, right? Like, ask us questions. We're happy to answer them, right?
Yeah. Oh, now I'm thinking, I know what people are going to ask. So many people are ask me whether or not people in ATRs are witches. Now, there is one little thing, since we're talking so much about witches, there is something about, in Santo and some of the other traditions, a witch, I guess traditionally, or a bruja was seen as a negative thing. So people really did not adopt that as a sort of badge of honor. There has been a reclaiming lately where I think a lot of people are using the word bruja or witch as to sort of identify in a positive way, but that's a brand new thing. So I do still make a distinction between them. I mean, I call myself a witch just because I started off doing those kinds of witchcraft practices, and I still do those kinds of witchcraft practices, but that for me is separate from the ATRs. So I just did want to add that footnote in there.
No, that's actually a very good point, right? Lots of different groups will have witches, right? Like Wiccans have witches, neo-pagans have witches, goddess spiritual people who would be offended by the whole idea of the use of a pentagram have witches, right? The various Luciferians and satanic groups have witches, right? There are witches in the ATRs, right? Did I add that right? ATRs, is this the abbreviation we're using now? I haven't heard that term yet until you used it today.
Oh, really? I feel like a lot of people are using it. It's African traditional religions.
Okay, cool. Yep, that makes sense. Okay, yep. So, there's witches who don't claim any allegiance to any religion, right? Cunning folk and folk witches, right? And you know, the bruja, like you say, and the streghiera, right, from the Italian witchcraft tradition, and you know, so on, right? So yeah, witch doesn't necessarily, you know, sorry Wiccans, you can't have the term, right? It's a job description, and it applies to a lot of different backgrounds, right?
Yeah, all that stuff about Dorothy Morrison getting sued by Turner Entertainment for using the Wicked Witch as part of her brand. But no, nobody can own Witch or Wicked Witch. I think that's still a little bit extreme. All right, so just to close, you reminded me, talking about stregas, I just wanted to say, you know, I've got a candle going, and I wanted to just take a moment to say that my best rise in peace wishes for Raven Gramassi and Eden McCoy, who have passed since the last time we taped that show. They were two pretty big author names, practitioners in the pagan community, people that I'd met on numerous occasions, and I think the loss will really be felt, and I hope they get where they need to go with the ancestors, and everyone else makes the transition without them in their lives from this point forward.
Yeah, a real loss to the community. Both of them were influences on me, right? A lot of us who, I guess, came to it about the time that I did would acknowledge that, right? So yeah, thank you for mentioning that. I was unsure of when we had last, you know, recorded. So yeah, it's, yeah, I mean, you know, death happens. I won't say, oh, it's just not right or whatever. Death comes to us all, but yeah, they'll be missed. That's for sure.
Definitely. All right, so now the normal spiel about subscribe to both our YouTube channels.
That's right.
Read our blogs. Patheos, P-A-T-H-E-O-S, because nobody can ever spell the darn thing.
That's right.
Pagan, we're both there. And buy our books, please.
And if you're interested, I am starting a new project. I'm starting an online witchcraft school. You will find it at sablearadia.teachable.com, which is a platform. Teachable is a platform entirely designed for online courses. I'm going to start with my Witches 8 Paths of Power courses, which I've, you know, mostly had designed from when I was teaching them as I was writing the book. So we'll be starting from there. We'll be doing a lot of other things, though, so check it out. I promise it won't be expensive, honestly. Keep it reasonable.
Yay, that's great. Congratulations. Yay.
Thank you.
Yay.
Yeah.
All right, everybody. Well, thanks, and thanks for watching. Please comment, ask us questions, and we'll see you next time.
You bet.